Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. Food security is not a sprint, but a marathon. In this episode, we dive into the story of how a small 30-year-old sustainable input company from Australia is helping to shape the future of agriculture in China. Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the planet mattered, a podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. In March last year, we launched our membership community to make it easy for fans to support our work. And so many of you have joined as a member. We've launched different types of benefits, exclusive content, Q&A webinars with former guests, Ask Me Anything sessions, plus so much more to come in the future. For more information on the different tiers, benefits and how to become a member, check gumroad.com/investingregenag or find the link below. Thank you. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today with the CEO of VRM Biologik, Kellie Walters. Welcome, Kellie.
Thanks for having me, Koen.
So we're going to unpack a lot of things in this podcast. I'm really much looking forward, but can you first give a bit of background on yourself and why you ended up working so much on and in soil?
Sure. Well, from the VRM Biologik perspective, our founder, Ken Bellamy, he started work about 30 years ago looking for simple solutions for addressing issues that were facing the environment, basically. The particular ones that he was looking at were things like declining soil fertility, a lack of available protein, advancing fungal domination, and limitation in nutrient levels required to sustain agriculture across the globe. In short, the capacity for the global population to feed itself, he saw as a real problem that was commencing at that point in time, so the late 90s, and was only going to exacerbate unless somebody did something about it. Personally, my drive to work in the environment started at university, trying to determine what to do as a career, and opted to really work in a field that would allow me to balance human need with environmental need. So over time, I worked in a number of different places and came to VRM nearly 10 years ago. And the entire ethos of the company, I think, was the biggest thing. I could see a massive problem. And at the time that I started, there was still only concentration on water resources and air resources. There was the commencement of the discussion around carbon, and there was no real emphasis on what was going to happen with food security. So it felt like we were preparing ourselves for what was inevitably going to come in the future.
Yeah, it's fascinating if you look back 10 years ago, soil and carbon and even biodiversity and nutrients, I feel like, but probably we can do some Google search and Google Trend search to see how much it exploded over the last years. But I feel like the last years have been an enormous wave. Obviously, my bubble has grown, but an enormous wave of interest for that. Luckily, because it's such a fundamental piece. So what does VRM do and what do you provide to farmers, to land stewards, also to other sectors, but focusing on the agriculture part?
The technology that we developed was really looking at a missing element in photosynthesis. And not too many people across the globe know that there is something called bacterial photosynthesis. It's really a process that occurs in biologically active soils that assists plants to undergo photosynthesis. So years ago, Ken looked very simply at the equations and determined that there was a missing key. What was that missing key? And part of the exploration early on was looking at rainforests. What kind of processes happen in rainforests? So nobody goes and applies a fertilizer in a rainforest. There are just complete balanced systems that operate. So what we sought to do was to replicate those in a very simple easy, cost-effective way that farmers could use. So we have a number of products, but we also have a number of processes that farmers can use as a diversified manufacture approach to looking around their farm, getting whatever biomass or organic residues exist and creating for themselves an agricultural input. So that's what we do across the world now.
That's a fascinating thing to unpack further, because often I see from input companies, they obviously want to sell the input, which is very secretive or comes in something that you can apply and you have to keep buying, because that's the business model. In this case, the process is very interesting because I see a lot of farmers in the regen ag space and the advanced agroecology space that want to make things themselves, or at least see, like, I need to use input that come from my farm or my biome or my landscape, because if I get it from very far, I just simply don't know the risks. So how does that process work? I'm a farmer in Australia, in the US, in China. We'll get to that in a second. And you sell me or license me a process. Does a big container show up, or do I have to watch a lot of YouTube videos? How does that work, turning my biomass in something that helps this biological photosynthesis?
Sure. Well, we have two processes. The one that is most easily implemented on farms is called the groundswell process. So this has been around for about 15 years now. And what it rolls out to be is a static fermentation approach to taking any kind of biomass that's existing on the farm. So it could be in a feedlot, bedding material from the pens, manure, spent feed, grasses, any kind of green waste that exists. There is a partnership, a paired formulation of products that's applied in a very minute amount to that material. And then the material is piled and left on the farm, covered for 6 months. So at the end of that 6-month period, you have a really humus-rich product, solid product, that is then applied onto soil as you would any kind of solid agricultural input.
And I need to keep using it as a form, like it's sort of a starter for the fermentation, if I'm correct. Like it's a very specific, the right kind of fermentation I would like, not the one that creates all kind of, if you're making sourdough, the ones that take over your sourdough in a very smelly, not like, let's say, dark way, instead of making a very nice bread. So you're supplying the ones that I need. Is that something that I will keep buying, or once, let's say, my farm is, or my soil is in transition further enough, it makes sense to keep applying that every year, or at some point I'm off it and 10 years down the road, my soils are alive enough to do that photosynthesis, the biological photosynthesis themselves, or how does that work? Is it a transition input? Is that, I think, my question, or is it a constant one?
It is a transition input in that over time, once the soil is built to a certain level, you have ultimately increased its buffering capacity. So its resilience is there. And over time, you can reduce the amount of material that you need to apply on that soil. That's for productive soils, though. If you're not actually using the soil, then it is basically a very quick process where you restore the soil and are able to leave it sit there. And in that case, you don't need to reapply. And
so this started, this specific process you mentioned 15 years ago, and Ken started more than 30 years ago. And how did China, coming from Australia, obviously there are a lot of connections to China. You have a footprint in the US as well. But how did China come on the radar, and not only on the radar, but actually becoming an important part of the company? It's a very interesting journey. That's why I'm asking. That we've been on there. We actually had, for many, many years, since about 2009, 2010, a really big presence in Malaysia, specifically in Penang Island. The other process that I was talking to you about, the bioregen process, is a way of taking putrescent organic materials, so things like food waste, and converting that into a liquid biofertilizer. So that was something that we worked in tandem with the Penang state government to roll out across the island. So in about 2013, the Malaysian government opted to introduce us to the Chinese government via the Malaysian consulate in China. So our very first trip was over to Guangzhou, and we went on behalf of the Malaysian government. And why did they do that? What was we think China, our big neighbor, can use this as well? Or what did they see? just as a nice neighbor, a nice introduction, as we do in neighborhoods? What happened there?
Well, very much we developed a strong relationship with Penang Island and with the ministries there and also with the local governments. Over time, we're able to solve for them what is normally an intractable problem. And for a long time, they were rated in the top 10 regions for processing waste in a sustainable way by the International Solid Waste Association. There's also a very big presence that they have in the UNEP program, so very strong UN connections. So in part, it was them seeing that there was validity and there was something extra special about what we could present, and it dovetailed nicely with what the demand is for in China.
And then what happened? Your first trip was there, and I think many might have a first trip somewhere. They get some connections, and then it sort of fizzles or doesn't lead to anything. In this case, it went differently.
Absolutely. Persistence, Koen. That's what we needed. So that was, 2013. And we developed some really great relationships with some state-owned enterprises, but also some other contacts within the country. And from there was a gradual rollout, an incremental rollout based on state-owned enterprises deciding that they were going to utilise our technology and then piloting that in a variety of ways with us. There was market testing that went on, so smaller distributors that were brought on board and went out into the communities to determine whether this was something that was feasible or not. And then the final act was us partnering with 5 state-owned enterprises to form one organisation that we now have a small shareholding in. And the idea is to restore their capacity to be able to feed their people.
And what is the current, it might be a very big question, but the current status of agriculture in China? I don't read a lot about it except whatever gets in the news here, which is obviously very colored. But what do you see as the current status of that, and why are they so interested in restoring? Like, are they ahead of the curve in terms of regeneration and restoration? Are they ahead of the curve? Are they seeing what's coming? Like, what do you feel there as you have spent a lot of time in agriculture in China?
Yeah, in total, I, with my family, lived in Singapore for 2 years. So did it deliberately so that I could travel very easily in and around that area, Southeast Asia in total. China is very progressive with regard to what they're doing in agriculture. So in 2020, they made a policy determination they were not going to be using any additional synthetic fertiliser.
Which means from that moment on, it had to stay or go down.
Absolutely.
The total quantity, which is a lot. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. And which is quite an impressive declaration to make. As a consequence of that, they had to find organic sources. And that's why they came to us. They saw that it was a perfect fit for what the direction of the country needed to go in. And the policy framework that has been established since then is very supportive and very sympathetic towards what we're trying to achieve.
So we're seeing they're sort of like in some other places, especially around, I think, electric cars, renewable energy, etc. They're definitely leading the pack. Would you say they're doing the same in agriculture, and especially let's say, tackling the input issues or the input challenges and barriers around that?
They very definitely are. And they're also seeing that there is a great opportunity presented in utilising the feedstock, the organic residues that they have. They're looking specifically at being able to build regional circular economies, and they're doing it on a grand scale.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's very impressive, and it is also something that exists as an example for the rest of the world.
And what has happened since you forming that partnership or that company where you have a minority stake in? What has since happened, as there were very challenging times in China, obviously globally with the pandemic as well, and also politically? Has it been smooth sailing since then, or what has happened since then?
It really has. The political side of things we prefer to leave to the politicians. The pandemic has had a massive impact on us being able to travel and actually do face-to-face business. So ordinarily we would be over there every 2 weeks. But it has been somewhat frustrating that we haven't been able to leave our shores to be able to go over. But we have really exercised the full potential of remote learning and remote training. We have 3 key staff over there already that work within the organisation and have been working with us for a long time. So it's relatively easy to be able to communicate through them. They're well attuned to what needs to be done over there. And there's an impetus because everybody just wants to get the job done. So in many ways, the pandemic has actually just allowed us to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we continue to build that relationship.
And less hours spent on flights, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's exactly less environmental impact in terms of travel. Yes,
it's and less jet lags and other and negative effects of flying so much. So, what are you supplying to that partnership or through the partnership? What process are you setting the processes, the inputs, and what is currently being applied, and where is it applied? On what kind of types of agriculture? And obviously, I'm interested in scale. Like, could a relatively small company from Australia really have a meaningful impact in terms of hectares or acres in China? I'm very interested to unpack that as well.
We supplied a license to the organisation over there. So they have become the national manufacturing entity. So they are, in essence, a carbon copy of us over in China. So with that comes the training around being able to develop the products from base products. And we, which was quite interesting, sent 32 full 20-foot shipping containers out of Townsville Port, which is in North Queensland. And it was a spectacle. There were a lot of people standing there going, this is massive, this is huge. So we were able to have all of that material go over there. So they, as an organisation, are licensed to not only manufacture the products, but to utilise the processes I was talking to you about before. VRM, as a global mission, is looking to restore 25% of the world's arable land over 25 years, starting last year. So this move into China through this tranche is addressing 20 million acres. So it's about 0.67% of where we want to be going to. So, it's small, I suppose, but if you look at that scale, 20 million acres is pretty impressive. They're using it in the centre of China, so in Shanxi province, and then they're utilising it for crops that are basically food crops. We've got a lot of activity going on in corn, leafy greens, cucumbers, tomatoes, strawberries, watermelon, really nutrient-dense food, which is fantastic for us to see. And also things like peony seeds, which is both a fuel crop and also something that's integral in their diet. So there's a large variety of things that we're doing over there. And we're also assisting in terms of the animal husbandry industry. So utilising a lot of the manures that come out of the chicken industries, either the poultry or layers, and also a lot of the piggeries over there. We're utilising the products in there as well. So overall, we're looking to do that ecosystem balance on smaller scale, regional scale, national scale.
And what can we learn as, let's say, in the West, which is not the right term, what can we learn in other countries from the approach you've seen Chinese policymakers, but also obviously the state-owned companies, et cetera, make in terms of food security, in terms of regional circular systems? What's there for us to take away?
The biggest takeaway for me is the focus on the future. So the planning that seems to occur seems to be very scattergun, I suppose, in its approach generally, and very short-term, very myopic in thinking. So what we have seen is a longer-term approach taken, and the understanding that there needs to be incremental change implemented and built upon in order for there to be a larger scale change in the long term. So food security isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. So we really need to be addressing it in that way. And I think what China has done from a policy perspective is something that we could all definitely learn from.
No, absolutely. And then more on the finance or investment side of things, with the lessons you've seen and you've learned so far, what would you tell, let's presume they're smart impact investors listening to this podcast, what would you, not advise them because we're not giving investment advice, but what would you tell them to focus on if they're saying, I'm extremely ready to step into the regenerative ag space? What excites you the most in terms of niches or pieces where activity is needed from your side of things? Is it focus on regions where not so much is happening yet, or it seems like it, maybe Malaysia, maybe Indonesia, maybe Southeast Asia, etc., or focus on the technology piece? Or what would you tell investors that want to get active in the space?
I suppose there's a three-pronged approach to what I would do and what I would suggest. And if I had $1 billion in my back pocket, this is certainly what I'd be doing with it.
You're taking my next question. No, go.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry. It's both what you would tell other investors, but it's a very good point, because at the end of the day, I always ask that question, what would you do? Which is much more revealing. So actually, let's jump to that one. If you had $1 billion as an investment fund, what would you focus on? Having seen, let's say, the state of degradation for sure in China, in Australia, in Malaysia, and at many other places you work, and having also seen the potential what a very small, still with a lot of respect, but a very small company could achieve, what would you focus on with $1 billion?
First and foremost, I would look to the areas where there is significant degradation in agricultural land. And if you have a look, there's a very stark image produced by the Food and Agriculture Organization that shows very clearly what the state of soil is across the globe.
So you would go to the worst areas? Worst areas. Because you can see the potential, because that's where it's most needed, or where it's most difficult potentially as well?
Both, or three.
Because not the easiest areas.
No, they're certainly the most difficult areas. But what we'd like to do is achieve the replenishment of the soil in those areas. And while I haven't done the in-depth research, the correspondence of those areas with where the food is most needed in the globe is, it's just a direct line between the two of them, basically.
So you would go to you wouldn't go to the places where you can make things incrementally a bit better, but probably easier because the soils are still in an okay-ish state. No, you would go to the worst hit areas, because there, and probably you're absolutely right, there's where food security is also the biggest issue. And thus you can save a lot of transport costs later on bringing food from other places and having the biggest impact there. Very interesting, but probably, not the easiest approach.
Probably not, no. We would have to have a whole lot of friends come along and assist us, that's for certain. But the diversified location of those kind of activities would start to build that global picture very quickly. The next thing I would do would be to fund the development of these regional circular economy systems so that everybody benefits. From an economic and environmental and a social perspective, everybody benefits from the circulation of money and the increase in the quality of everything. So we're looking at abundance. We're looking at creating abundance. And the farmer themselves, that's where the abundance needs to start in order to ensure that any kind of behaviour change is sustained. But the last element that I would do would be looking at education and training. So one of the key activities that we're engaged in at the moment is identifying a specific list of what do you do if you want to be implementing practices on your land that are regenerative. What are they? And how do you go about them? And how do you cost whether they're appropriate for you or not? So there's a program, for example, in Australia called Cultivate Farms that we strongly support. They take young farmers, train them in how to implement these practices, but also how to run a farm business and how to be investment ready when people come along with wadges of money, just ready to invest in the future of farming. So I think all of those three would be my favourite approaches.
And you talked about abundance. Do you see that switching the mindset from scarcity to abundance, which I think could be an absolutely fundamental one? Like we could definitely grow, even in very degraded lands. We can grow a lot. A lot can be grown if we manage it differently. But I also noticed that a lot of people sort of take the status quo as the status quo. Like this is how the land should look. This is how the land always had looked, and this is what it could produce, and thus we cannot change. Do you notice that a lot? And if so, how do you overcome that? Or are the farmers that reach out to you are already, let's say, on the train of abundance and want to get tools to get the job done? Or do you get a lot of resistance when you say, we can actually produce here X and Y, or we can produce, there's so much more potential, and everybody's like, yeah, but the drought will never, or this land will never sustain that? Because like, how do you overcome the scarcity mindset into abundance?
There's very definitely a lot of that. We hear all the time, for example, oh, yeah, that works there, but it won't work here.
What do you say then? Like, what do you say when somebody says that? Because I hear it a lot as well. And obviously, as I'm not the farmer on that piece of land, nobody can guarantee it works, but we're very likely those approaches, if they work at many places, they could also work in your place. Like, what do you say when somebody says that that's another piece of land, or they have another climate or another soil?
The best way to overcome that is to have a wide diversity of, here is where we've done it previously.
Come and look.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot of social proof that people are looking for. And we are always very willing, and we have wonderful clients that we've worked with for a very long time, and they have converted over the years to being advocates. So are very generous in terms of donating their time to discuss what the change has been for them. So that we're very lucky in that respect. But part of what we did, the pandemic allowed us a little bit of time to sit and reflect and think. And one of the things that we looked at was, okay, what mechanism can we put in place to encourage abundance, to start to really design a mindset that farmers can step into, that is much more a comfortable place to be than the scarcity, the drought is always going to be here. There's nothing I can do to change. So we developed during that time, VRM did, the Agricultural Abundance Program. So that's been running since June 2020. And the whole point of that is to form alliances of farmers who are looking to transition or who are looking for that kind of support to be able to implement regenerative practices on their land. And we had a little bit of a hiatus. It was an interesting time for farmers towards the end of 2020. But what we've seen is a big take up now, most recently over the past couple of months, by people who are really getting on board and really going, yeah, we don't want to be a part of this negativity anymore. We really want to look to the future, and we really want to look to how we can help ourselves.
Would it mean that if you go into, let's say, back you're running the 1 billion investment fund again, you go into the most severely degraded places on earth, would you look for that one example, or would you try to create a one example so at least there's somewhere to point to? Or where would you start then? Because probably that whole area is in scarcity mindset, rightfully so, because it seems like an ecosystem is degrading and everything seems to be going down when that happens. So what would you do? It is very theoretical, obviously, but what would you do to flip that, to flip the conversation in that case? Would you finance a pilot program? Would you buy some land and show what's possible? What would be your approach?
Yes, the pilot program has been the approach that we've taken everywhere. So our standard process is to go to a place and find the champion, find the individual or the company who understands entirely what we're about and is willing to pioneer that approach in their area or even in their country. It's what we've done in China. It's what we've done in the US. And we're very lucky in Australia, we have a number of those champions. So,
and do you always find them? Even if do you always find a pioneer?
Everybody that we've dealt with, yes. Yes, they've always been pioneers. And it's interesting reflecting on them. People can see case studies on our website, videos on our website. The people that we're lucky enough to engage with, leaders in their own industries. So they are very influential and they are trustworthy. People understand what they say when they say it and believe, okay, if they're doing it, then it must be okay. It must be safe and it must be effective. And I'm looking at their results and I'm getting on board too.
And does it take time I mean, of course it does, but to build up trust with them, because they must be approached by many companies promising the moon and the stars and everything in between. And so you must have a very long patience line to build up trust with pioneers like that also don't want to risk their name, their status, etc., by promoting something or being an ambassador or being positive about something that they don't know really well. Like they need to know it really in and out and need to work potentially with it for 10 years before they start sharing it in their community, which from a business perspective might be challenging for you.
Some of them are like that. Some of them want to work with it. They want to know the ins and outs. They will spend 10, 15 years applying the techniques and looking at it and asking questions. And some though, early adopters jump on board. So we have some people who come to us. I had a conversation just the other day with somebody who said after an hour, okay, yep, let's do it. Let's go.
On a small pilot part of his or her farm, I'm imagining, or on the full one?
An initial small pilot with the groundswell process is a really great introduction. It's quite easy to do and people can see the results quite quickly. So that's a really good entree into, this is one of the multitude of things that you can do on land. A lot of the people that we work with, though, do commence like that, build quite quickly, and then over time look to what's going on. But as I said, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. The long-term relationships are key to building a business that's going to last and that's going to be effective in its mission in the long run.
And if you had a magic wand, so we took away your investment fund, unfortunately, but you have the power to change one thing in the food and agriculture space overnight, what would that be?
I think it would be skepticism. I would immediately release the agricultural world from skepticism and give them the confidence to be able to change something new, given that there is a likelihood that it is going to make their lives better. It's going to make their farms functional, operational, profitable and sustainable. The level of skepticism across the globe, and it's not restricted to agriculture at all, but...
I would like to extend it beyond ag if I could influence your magic power. But it's a very good point.
That's right. So, I would like to encourage people to have a go, to be open to the opportunity and the possibility of being able to do something different and have it work.
And what is up for you, let's say, the next 12 months? Obviously, these are crazy years and don't know if you can travel or not, but looking at the program and the progress and the company in China, what are exciting things you look forward to over the next 12 months? What's going to happen? If we talk in a year from now, we're not talking October 2021, what would be or could we be discussing?
It's funny that you say travel, because there is every now and then a beacon that is set up. Yes, shortly you might be able to travel overseas. So I am hanging on that opportunity. The conversations that we are having in China, continuing, building very quickly in the US and also in Australia. The next 12 months are going to be out of this world in terms of what we're going to be able to do. There are a whole lot of people coming to us to talk about what we do and realising the potential of that. I would love to travel. But anticipating, and let's be positive about this, that borders do open and that we can freely move. I think that there's going to be a lot of presence of VRM into the US, and there's going to be a significant shift towards that 25 and 25 goal achieved in the next 12 months.
And why do you think now the US is shifting or is more ready to shift? Let's phrase it differently. Why now, as investors always like to ask?
The opportunity market-wise is there. VRM has a very distinct offering when compared to a lot of what are perceived to be people in the similar field in the US in particular. And what I'm finding is that people are waking up to the opportunity that we present. It's funny in that a lot of the discussions that I've been having recently have been around an overnight success 30 years in the making. So we were at some point in time going to hit that tipping point, and I think we've reached it now.
I'm very much looking forward to checking in a year from now and seeing what has happened, hopefully with some travel at least. And I want to thank you so much, Kellie, for taking the time and sharing not only on China, but in general on the input story that we don't cover enough on this podcast.
Thank you so much.
If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you and if you have the means, please join my membership community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on gumroad.com/investingregenag or in the description below. Thank you so much and see you at the next podcast. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? And what questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, agtech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. And the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're gonna look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soil builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking. Click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.